In the solemn hush of the Judicial Review Office, silence begets peace. Peace begets thought, and thought begets results. The swish of red mandarin robes, no, that's not quite right. Duty and justice, the line between law and good. That's not a bad angle, and it's worth talking about, but maybe thousands of miles and 100 different turns in life separated two particular children before their first year. They were nothing but strangers until they found friendship in one of Bai Zhao's hitting little eateries. Not even blood connects them, but a single man and his choices ties their... no, I mean... the doc will want to hear about this for their HR evaluations, but for this meeting I want... what do I want? Okay, maybe... Pheramut glide through mists and dreams as ministers meet in moonlit halls. All the while, people gather around the warmth of flame and... I guess to be there. Did you know, Doctor, gods in heaven and emperors on their throne affect millions of lives they inherently have trouble understanding? I mean, sure, it's important enough to talk about, but it's so painfully obvious as a central theme. You could have trot a dumpling from here to Victoria and manage a warmer takeaway. Olvídalo. Maybe I still have time to call up the doctor and cancel. I don't want to waste their time with... Doctor, wait, I'm hungry? You say that, but this isn't a normal booth, is it? This lantern has an arts unit. Sure, it's subtle, but I still have a LeBerry's eyes, and I think I can guess what it's for. Come on, Doctor. I know you're not that bad of a liar, but... Alright, message received. Let's make this report a little less formal. We'll just talk over a meal. Careful, Doctor. That's a particular kind of malt sugar candy. It really sticks to your teeth. Though I guess that's kind of the point. I believe it's called, pardon my pronunciation, Zertong in Chinese, similar to something like kitchen treats in Victorian. There's a particular story about it where the stove, or kitchen god, just before the new year, prepares to travel to heaven to report on the activities of every household in Yang. The Zertong is an offering to the stove god during the associated festival. Depending on who you ask, it's meant to simply sweeten his words, or stick his lips together so he can't report anything bad. You've probably heard a variant of the folklore in the early operation records. Part of the mystery that played out these last few weeks involved someone breaking into a well-guarded home, and instead of stealing anything, smearing honey over the lips of a painting. This is the folklore they're referencing. It was meant to symbolize that the vandal knew about a secret that Ning Shu was keeping, a dangerous secret about the supposed murder of the late emperor, and the killings that followed. One that we're now just casually talking about over dinner. Funny how the world goes sometimes. The world changes, and you have to be capable of changing with it. I'm reminded of two things. First, when Yu Cheng brought Ling Qingyang to the snowy mountains as a sort of passing of the torch from one detective to another, it was all to show her the pine tree he planted when he was a bright-eyed young man. To tell her how, after all these years, he's not the same man, and this is not the same tree. Yet when he dies, he wants her to cut this tree down and make his coffin from its wood. I'm sure you get the gist of the metaphor. There's a version of it involving a river instead that I'm pretty fond of. As we grow and experience new things, we change. Our looks, our skills, our very philosophies can shift drastically. But it's that second line, the bit about wanting to be buried in that pine tree's wood, that got me thinking. I don't think I can put my thoughts into words just yet, so instead I want to ask you a few questions. Don't answer right away, just think about it while we talk. If the you of today is different than the you of 5 years ago, do you think you're still responsible for their actions? Would it be shameful of you to take pride in the successes you had then? Is it still necessary to take responsibility for the sins and mistakes you made then? Is there any meaning at all in the connections you once held dear but haven't been able to renew for seasons upon seasons? The answers might seem obvious, but again, just keep it in mind for me. Right, the other thing. It's something Liang said when he politely debated the merits of war with Ning Shu. He was opposed to it, citing the horrific effects it would have on the people. As they say, you can't wing a war any more than you can wing a catastrophe. Yet Ning Shu pushes him to reconcile that belief with the thousands years of prosperity that their ancestors won in the Great Hunt. To which Liang responds that times change and circumstances change. It's hard to compare things across different historical eras. He goes on to say that the Great Hunt was a necessary and desperate gamble, one they made from a position of weakness where they had little other choice. But now that they act from a position of strength, now that they can avoid a war, they must. It leads me to think about how precarious building upon a past legacy is. You've heard me talk about the dangers of not adapting to changing conditions before, but these recent events in Yan have reminded me that, while it's important to move away from our past, they're still valuing remembering it as clearly as possible. I mean, just consider the food we're eating. Don't you think it'd be sad for malt sugar candies to simply be sweet treats instead of a symbol of festivals for the new year? Don't you think it'd be a lot less fun for hot dogs to just be quick and easy food, robbed of their slightly scandalous history in energetic arenas? Like Originium neatly paxing information, Jingshu opened my eyes to the way that even food can speak volumes about a people and a culture if you know enough about its history to listen. And of course, there's plenty of history to be found in names, titles, even the door sill we walked past to get in. It's something I hear commonly that Yanese culture can seem opaque and mystical to foreigners, because there's so much that's communicated in symbols like these instead of directly spoken. But honestly, I wonder if it's more just the case that we just take all the symbolism of our own cultures for granted. For example, the title of Grand Preceptor being distinct from Grand Tutor might not be obvious to most Colombians, for example. That being that, while they're both direct advisors to the True Lung, the former is meant to be particularly focused on matters of morality, while the latter is meant to be focused on the True Lung's academic skills. While there's obviously nuance I'm not going into, just knowing that much helps add a lot of texture to those titles that isn't directly communicated, don't you think? But suppose I told you a story of a pioneer from Colombia. The title Pioneer would mostly just evoke images of freedom and adventure to most people who aren't familiar with the culture. But for us, it goes without saying that there's an undercurrent to the title that implies whoever wears it has been dealt a rough hand in life, a history of punishment, indentured servitude, or desperation that isn't always explicitly stated, but is neatly implied by the term if you're familiar with Colombian history and culture. In both cases, the history and culture surrounding a term can be just as important to understand as what's explicitly being said. Chrysanthemum tea is said to be good for stress and anxiety. Well, that and a whole host of other things. Honestly, it's become a bit of a cure-all in people's minds thanks to how ubiquitous it is. It's meant to soothe away heat in the body, whether from fever, fear, or anger. It turns out a lot of calming maladies fall under that umbrella if you squeeze them in hard enough. And I'll admit, it really does do wonders to calm the mind in times of stress. But maybe that has to do with more than just the drink itself. If you're taking the time to drink it, that means you're acknowledging a problem after all. Even better if it comes from the sweetness of it being offered by a friend. Too often the heat of a situation can force us to act before we have a chance to even realize how clouded our minds have become, let alone before we have a chance to do something about it. Consider the situation here 40 years ago. The Emperor's heart burned from the death of his father. He felt the abandonment of a brother who seemed guilty of fratricide. The courts and the people, now suddenly his court and his people, seemed on the verge of revolt. I do wonder what exactly went through his mind as the Grand Preceptor was condemned, as the traitors were assassinated. As faithful students spilled their heartblood to show the sincerity of their belief in their teachers and their own innocence. As families, children were put to the sword. Necessary evil, misunderstanding, human anger, cold-hearted politics and tradition. Take your pick as to what to blame for the choices made then. Look, all that said, I'm not naive enough to say I could have handled things better than the Emperor had I been in his robes. The fires that fuel the heart bring about smoke that clouds the mind. no matter how great or powerful a man, I don't believe anyone exists who could act clearly in that situation. Even if I know there's no issue, it feels strange to talk so, candidly about this here. But, in any case, I can't decide whether I think it's funny or poetic that Blaze was the one to finally confront him. If there is anyone with a bonfire for a heart, it's her, after all. Just think of the way she tried to push your buttons after your amnesia. How quick she is to embrace or fight with Qingyang or Xingzhu, depending on what's on the forefront of her heart at the time. On the other hand, maybe it's because she's so willing and able to feel everything so purely, that she was the best person to burn through the Chulung's hesitance, to accept the regret they were desperately trying to smother. Speaking of their meeting, I had a few idle thoughts about why Blaze chose the path she did, given how many other endings to that dinner she was considering. Remember those questions I asked you to think on? I think Blaze came to some answers herself. I think she realized that the man who made those choices no longer existed. The Yang in which those choices were made is far different from the Yang of today. But those choices were made, and we inherit the effects of those choices we once made. We inherit the responsibility of the choices we once made. I know it's easy to get caught into horrible cycles of what-ifs, of being trapped in the past like one of Dusk's paintings. But that doesn't mean we can pretend to be infallible, or turn our eyes away from our mistakes. I think the reason we're different from the us of the past isn't something as simple as a difference in time or a changing circumstance. After all, look how unchanging a lot of the immortal beings can be, if they're not challenged often enough. Time alone isn't what causes us to change. At least, I don't think so. Being able to acknowledge the weakness of our past, being able to experience the sting of regret, stoking the desire to atone for our mistakes, that feeling, that regret, it's not only what connects us to the us of the past, but it's what gives us the opportunity to make better choices in the present. That feeling, pride and regret over the choices we made, is what forces us to change. Change, regret, hindsight, pride, they're all tied together, I think. So that's why I think that if we reject responsibility for the things we've done in the past, we're also rejecting the change that supposedly separates us from who we were in the past. For so long, tradition and politics trapped the Chulung, denied them the humanity of regret, the opportunity to right wrongs made in anger. If Blaze wasn't able to get through to him, much like you got through to Yuan, I doubt we'd have the luxury of sharing this meal today, Doctor. It looks like I'm able to find something to rattle on about after all, for better or worse. The wonders of a good warm meal, I suppose. Coming out here was a good idea, Doctor. Thank you. Jeez, I kind of feel like I'm spoiling dinner with this sort of talk. Maybe I can think up something a little more fun and light. This tea has tangerine peels in it. Okay, just trust me for a minute here. It's a calming additive for teas, partially thanks to herbology, partially thanks to the word for them being a pun for luck in Yanese, and of course thanks to the taste. But at the moment, I wanted to bring up something funny. Those two officials who left, you know the word for officials like them, right? Mandarin. And tangerines, of course, are both a kind of mandarin fruit. Given the importance of both in Yanese culture, you'd think there is some story between the two. But you won't find one. There's no real connection. And that makes more sense when you realize that in Yanese, the words aren't actually similar at all. Instead, the connection came about when, I believe it was an Iberian province that nicknamed the fruit after the officials, perhaps due to their reddish color, perhaps due to the fruit evoking thoughts of high society that paired well with the foreign ministers. In any case, years later, Victorians would borrow the word Mandarin for both fruit and official, just like the Iberians themselves borrowed the word for minister from the Sargonians. A chain of coincidences that led to me, years later, puzzling over books trying to find some ancient Yanese connection between fruits and ministers that never existed. Still, wild pincer chase or not, that journeys would help me appreciate Shinshu's fascination with food and its history. Not just the symbolism and meaning behind foods, but how they got those meanings. It really is an interesting way of preserving the past. Well, so much is lost in our history, especially the stories of those not important enough to capture a biographer's eye, or those who, for one reason or another, are scoured from the history books. The words we use and the food we eat are universal and human in a way that captures so much of our history that's normally lost, discarded, and eroded. It was during Shinshu's onboarding interview that she helped me course correct when I got caught up in my mad search for a connection between Mandarins and Mandarins. Obviously, I've been trying my hand at picking out the cultural significance of foods and the like since then, but of course, Shinshu still humbles me on that front. For example, this scallion tofu. I've heard a few things, but nothing I feel confident sharing. It's not that I didn't find stories. Some about women picking onions on auspicious days to have children. Tofu imparting silken beauty to those who eat it. Or scallions tied by the belt during pregnancy to encourage a healthy male heir. I find lots of folk tales that seemed believable enough, but not being Yanese myself, I found it difficult to verify most of them. It's way too popular for people outside of Yang to make up stories and just attribute to Yang as a marketing ploy. It's like how stories of Sarka's witchcraft, Minoan heroes, or sancting halos get mangled up for Rankwood films. So here's your fair warning. Even the things I do sound confident of, you should take with a bit of salt. But that's enough covering my bases. One thing that does seem true to me is how much it represents home cooking. Easy to make, healthy, and pairs well with all kinds of sauces. I don't see a reason to doubt that. And to be clear, I'm not the kind of person to think calming food is some sort of insult. First off, even calming food can reflect incredible skill, like the unique ways Yu cuts the tofu to suit the dish. And more importantly, their accessibility means that calming foods can fill the stomachs and warm the souls of countless people. Something that Yu also cherishes quite a bit. He's an incredible chef that takes a borderline narcissistic level of pride in his cooking. But despite that, he genuinely isn't after fame or fortune, and it's the way he cares about others that impresses me the most about him. He practically ran a shop at a loss, going so far as to balk at the idea of collecting a customer's food debts. Actually, to keep with the symbolism theme we've got going, have you noticed how low his store's door sill was? From my understanding, doorsteps in Yang began as practical things to keep out mice, air drafts, and the like, but over time they came to mean more than that. Large and intricate ones are status symbols, and they're symbolic of the barrier that keeps your good fortune in, misfortune out, and reminds any who pass to do so with care and deference. I've heard it's a faux pas to step directly on one, for example. But despite that, Yu keeps as low as he possibly can. Without the cultural subtext, it's just an odd quirk. Maybe makes him seem cheap or something along the like. But with that context, I think that shows his desire to cast aside pretense, fame, any and all obstacles between his meals and oppressing his hunger. He reminds me a bit of Shu, the Sui sibling with a passion for farming. Although, while Shu's philosophy is mixed with a firm belief in self-sufficiency and growth, Yu is... I think he chooses to keep his philosophy simple. Like when he was in the outskirts, doling out bowls of fresh food to wanderers and bandits. You could take a lesson from that about how, by helping them meet their basic needs, he saved them from ripping each other apart. I think that's an important and practical lesson. One about how doing just a little to help people meet their basic needs allows them to lead incredibly better lives. After all, one of the people he saved and inspired with a simple bowl of food grew to become Mo Bofu, the greatest chef under heaven currently. I could talk for hours about this, and my frustrations with how I feel this simple truth is ignored so often, but the funny thing is, I don't think he particularly cares about anything that complicated. I think it really is as simple to him as everyone deserves a good meal. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's that he doesn't understand the premise. He teases the Grand Tutor about needing to rely on him to feed the people a humble chef can't. And he does hope that those he's fed will go on to feed others someday. But it doesn't feel to me like he expects anything at all. Whatever humble or grand lives they lead afterwards isn't something he concerns himself with. It feels odd since I know how ancient and powerful he is, but I can't help but want to pat his head and call him a good kid after moments like that. Not that I'd actually do anything so unprofessional, of course. Jeez, I feel like I'm rambling even more than usual. Are you sure this is alright, Dokutah? There are plenty more meals and plenty more bits and pieces that caught my attention while going over the reports, after all. Look, I'm going to take a minute to check on something, but, well, let me know if you're still in the mood to continue when I get back. Either way, this is shaping up to be a good evening, Doctor.